Welcome folks. Today we are tying an egg spey fly, like kind of an intruder hobo style fly, more of a hobo style spey fly because we're not going to have two shoulders on it, but it doesn't really have a name. I made it up the other night for the fishing I wanted to do. So we're using a 26mm Jerry, what are these guys? Jerry French round eye shank and Spirit River 6.4 mil tungsten salmon pink beads and a hot orange, I think 6/0 uni thread. So I'm gonna get us tied in right behind the bead here, and then I'm gonna come back and put a few extra wraps in behind the bead. So the thing about this particular fly is that that bead is way bigger than this shank, and this is actually gonna be a pretty easy, fast, effective steelhead fly to tie. And a lot of these kind of style of flies are not fast. This one you can bang out pretty quick, so I really like it. But there's not gonna be a crazy amount of stuff in here, so I almost need to add a little extra bulk. Every time I'm up near the front, I'm just gonna add a little extra so that by the time we're done with the fly, this bead is gonna have something behind it and it's not gonna slide down the shank. Okay, so a few extra turns there. Now I'm gonna work my way back down the shank here. Doesn't need to be touching wraps. I like to keep them fairly close just so that there's a thread base for the wire to lay on, but it does not need to be perfect. Nobody is gonna see this. Okay, and I'm not trying to tie these flies big. The goal here is to have a small, round, pink and orange kind of egg colored fly. So I'm not even tying it all the way back as far down the shank as I can. Now we're gonna put in the wire. So I am using Hairline's intruder trailer wire for size 6 or larger in black. Dealing with wire is actually a little bit tricky. So I find, first of all, I want a relatively short piece because this is a short shank. But I find that wire tends to, I just like to kind of fold it over and then it kind of has a place where it naturally wants to bend. So that's about as short as it, like if I wanted to try and make this any shorter, it starts to get stiff. You can kind of see like right there, it's like it doesn't like it anymore. So right about there is the right length for me. So then I'm gonna take my scissors and cut with the very base part of the scissor right in there. Just cut right through it. Perfect. Now, I drop my wire on the ground. This is actually an important part and a little difficult. So I have it folded like that. I grab it with my other fingers and just run my fingers down. So now there's an initial actual crease there. And do that again. And now I work these fingers up. So I'm only dealing with a little bit of loop, and I pinch that and make that fold as tight as I can. And that's gonna help seat the trailing hook a lot better, which I forgot to grab out before I got started. Oh, I've got all my materials right here. For this, we are using a size 2 Aqua Talon swing hook. I think. I have a few different hooks in this little thing. I salvaged some off of some old flies recently and just kind of dumped them in here. Okay, we got our hook. Now you take the two ends of the wire and slot it in behind the eye or through the eye, and then pop this over the bend of the hook and pull this all forward nice and even. So the reason I was so finicky about getting that good fold is that then you're going to get the wire on here even, and you can take a fingernail and push that end to help a little bit. But you want it on there even. It's going to look a lot better. It's going to swim more natural. And most importantly, if your wire is like a little tighter on one side than the other, that's a weak point and you can actually break wire there, and you don't want to lose a fish that way. to attach the wire and the hook, we are just going to slot that wire up underneath the bead, right along the top of the shank. And you want to make sure that they stay, like the left wire stays on the left side and the right wire stays on the right side. This particular bit of wire is kind of giving me some trouble here. Okay, I got that slotted in here. And now you're going to wrap that in nice and tight and make sure that the wire is staying along the top of the shank that whole time. So normally when I'm tying an intruder style fly like this, I would wrap forward and then I would bend the wire back over and wrap back over that just to give it a little extra oomph. Now that said, we're not going to do that with this one just because it's a short fly and because we can slot that wire up underneath the bead. So sometimes guys are like, wow, don't you feel like you're going to like lose the wire or the hook that way? But I've never once had that problem. I bend out hooks before I yank the wire out from under here. And then gonna put a few extra thread wraps in here again at the front, just to keep that bolt going, and then a quick wrap all the way to the back again. Now I take my first dubbing. In this case, it's one I've had around for a while. This is Senyo's Laser Dub Shrimp Pink. What I like about it, it's not very long strands, it's kind of bulky, and that's what we're using it for. This is going to be the back end of the fly and the dubbing ball. So I take my dubbing wax, put some on here, pull out some dubbing, and right now I'm just covering up the very back of the fly here. I'm not even making the dubbing ball yet. Like, you could tie this on an even shorter shank and you could skip this step. So just so it doesn't look like literally bare shank back here, we're just going to wrap some of this forward. Dubbing wax helps a lot when you're doing dubbing noodles. I highly recommend. Didn't used to use it for a long time, and then once I finally got some, made a world of difference. So what's difficult about steelhead flies like this, in my opinion, is learning how to judge the proportions correctly. And this is just me being finicky right here, that I'm unwrapping it like that just because the taper wasn't quite perfect, but it really doesn't matter. Now I'm almost wrapped as far forward as I want to be here. So yeah, like I was saying, the hardest part of steelhead flies, in my opinion, is getting the proportions right, because it's so easy to end up crowding the head of the fly, or not far enough forward, or just not giving yourself enough space. It looks wonky. So that's what really takes some practice. Okay, this is as far forward as I want. Now I'm going to start building up. I want a very significant dubbing ball. Now that said, about the proportions thing, I find a lot of the times if you've got a nice dubbing ball, you can really, even if you're tying things in and they look like they're ending really close to the bead, you can really work them back and give yourself more space again. So right now we're going to be building up a dubbing ball, and that's just going to be adding a bunch of layers of dubbing right on top of this, all in one spot. And the point of that is it's going to serve as a prop, basically. It's just going to serve as in the way for everything that's going to go on in front of it. So that way when the materials push back against it, they can't just lay flat along the shank. They're going to stay in a nice, they're going to be pushed up and give the fly some real good profile. And unfortunately, this is like not difficult, but one of the most irritating parts of the process here. Just building up this dubbing ball. And it doesn't look difficult, and it isn't, but it actually, there are some tricks to it. Like, you don't want to be, that's too much dubbing. Adding a little bit at a time, so you're using a thin dubbing noodle, is actually, in my experience, more efficient than trying to cut to the chase and just add a ton at once. But yeah, if you make your wraps two right on top of each other, then you'll find as you keep tying that your ball can suddenly just like erode and a bunch of the wraps fall off to one side or the other and ruin your dubbing ball. So you gotta give it enough support on either side of the main part. In particular, I'm shooting for support behind it because there's gonna be support in front of it as I tie in all the other materials. So learning how to make your dubbing ball effective does take a little bit of practice. Okay, this is gonna be my last wrap. If this wasn't a video, I'd maybe do a little bit more, but I'm trying to keep things timely here. Plus that looks good. And then here's the trick is I want that to be a sharp divide between the ball and the shank. So I just do one wrap and now I'm just on the other side of the dubbing ball here. Now we are grabbing Hairline's Intruder Prop Feather in Shrimp Pink, just like the dubbing color was. And I have been a huge fan of this color lately. So I'm looking for a relatively small and round fly. So I've got all my feathers out and I'm looking to pull out a relatively smaller prop feather here, something with a little bit shorter fibers, but also a long enough stem to tie well here. Let's see, what do I like? Just being choosy here. Let's see if that one does the trick. And then I like to snip them off instead of ripping them out of these like threaded things, because then everything gets looser as you go and eventually your nice threaded feathers are gonna fall apart. Okay, we've got our feather. We grab it at the tip and pull all the fibers back. And now we're gonna tie it in immediately below that dubbing ball. Oh, I've given myself too much space behind the eye here, I think. And I just like to wrap this forward because I'm still looking for that extra bulk in behind the bead. And then I just fold those fibers back over and wrap them back. And now wrap back up to the bead again and hit it with a 2-turn whip finish, which my whip finish tool is somewhere. There we go. Bam, bam, sweet. Now we are going to use the rotary function on the vise. Hold on to the top end of the feather here and just rotate this around, making sure to keep pulling those fibers back as we go so that way they're not going to be stuck underneath the... Some of them are, because I didn't trim off one side of this feather, which a lot of guys would do, but I like the bulk. So it does take more, it is more difficult to wrap so that it looks nice when you do that way, but I want the fiber density that I'm gonna get from that. So you just gotta keep bending those feathers, folding them back, and wrapping forward. Okay, and that is gonna be about the right amount right there. And now we're gonna tie that in. One. Just two nice tight wraps before I'm gonna trim this, because it's gonna get locked in better. And so now you guys can see it looks like it's too much, right? Like it looks like it's taking up too much space. There's nothing left to work with behind the bead, but that's not true. Now you can just wrap back, and this is gonna put everything into the shape that you want. And you can wrap back pretty much to where that dubbing ball is, and because you have that sharp angle between the dubbing ball and the shank, all those fibers, you actually need to wrap back to where the dubbing ball is, because having it sharp up against it like that is gonna pop those fibers up. And this is what's really gonna give the fly a lot of body right here. Next, we're gonna add some dubbing, but for the purposes of flash, because at the end of this fly, I'm not gonna put any like wings or feathers that are gonna arc back over the whole thing, and there's no flash in here yet. So I'm gonna throw a dubbing loop, just like that. And then up to the bead, 2-turn whip finish. Same drill as before. Bam, bam. Sweet. For this dubbing, I am using the Ice Dub Shrimp Pink, which looks orange to me. And that's what I want. This is kind of a pink-orange fly, really good steelhead colors. And I am pulling out a decent chunk of this, especially because the fibers on this are not particularly long. So pretty big chunk, and then I rip it in half and stack them on top of each other like that. Grab my dubbing spinner, hook that in there, and then get all of this in there. Kind of space that out so it looks nice. Pull it up closer to the shank and give that a couple nice spins. Bam. Now this stuff is fairly strong, so I like to give it quite a few spins before I even start to brush it out. So this is probably as many spins as I'm even going to give it. And now we're going to take our dubbing brush and brush this out, lengthen out those fibers. Really give it a pretty good working over here. Really pull a lot of that out. Sweet. Now we're going to use the rotary function on our vise again and wrap this in. And again, we want to have it wrap in tight to those prop feathers for the same reason as we had to wrap the feathers tight to the dubbing ball, is it's all going to help keep itself propped up and keep giving the fly some profile and volume. Now the unfortunate thing about this particular dubbing is that the fibers really aren't very long. So they're not going to extend past this. That looks like enough to me. They're not really going to extend past these prop feathers very well, but they're going to add a lot of sparkle just within the fly. 2, 3 of those. Trim off this thread. And now we're going to do the same thing as we did with the fibers, pull everything back and wrap back. About there. Nice. Actually, I'm going to undo those wraps, and before I do that, I'm going to brush this out one more time. Sweet. Now we're going to wrap back until those fibers want to pop. Sweet. Looks good. Alrighty. Now our final ingredient is going to be some pink Arctic fox. So we're going to throw another dubbing loop. Bam. Bam. This loop don't look that good, but whatever, it'll work. Come back up to the bead. It's looking like I need some more bulk here to me. I'm just going to add some in right there. 2-turn whip finish. You all know the drill now. Bam. Alright, we're going to take our pink fox, and Arctic fox, at least what I'm buying, comes in these Ziploc bags, and that kind of bends it out of shape. Like you can see all the tip fibers on this fur are all bent. If you want to tie really perfect looking flies, you got to get this stuff, Wash it, condition it, comb it out, it'll be much straighter. But that's more effort than I want to put in, so I just grab off a decent chunk and I'll just have my flies be a little bit curved. Pinch a decent chunk out separate, and you can kind of, before you take it off, like look, that's a lot straighter than it was originally. Then you trim close to the skin just to keep this whole thing neater. You can kind of see what's going on there. Like that's all gone, and then that'll be my next bunch. Measure it up on the fly. So you want these to be longer than the intruder, than the prop feathers. On this particular fly, I would say that I've tied this hook in too long. So these ones are gonna come out to about even with, I don't know, the middle of the shank, but usually I'd want it to be even with the bend. Measure them out on there, grab them with my other fingers, and then trim these ends so that there's some excess to it still, which will make it a lot easier to work with in the dubbing loop. Grab my dubbing spinner, hook that in there, slot the fibers in, and then what you want to do is do like a rolling pinching motion. So it's like that, and that will get all of your fibers aligned the best. And then once you have them nicely aligned, you can kind of spread them out up and down the loop. Nice. And then we're going to take our scissors, and here's where, so leaving it longer than you need to makes it easier to manipulate in the dubbing loop, because you have this extra on the left side, or on the side that doesn't have the long fibers, but you don't want to deal with that while you're wrapping it in. So you take your scissors and trim that off. This part is honestly one of the most difficult and F-uppable parts. Like you guys aren't going to see, but this is actually my second try at this one. So it's in there, give it a nice spin, and let that spin up through the loop. Sweet. Okay, that's still not in there very tight, or even close to tight enough actually. Gonna give it another spin. Sweet. Now it's in there a little bit, so I'm gonna give it a light brush with my dubbing brush. And learning how to manipulate a dubbing loop effectively just takes some practice. So right now we're just giving it a little brush, just so that the fibers aren't trapped and twisted around the rope as we go, but it's still not in there that tight. If we were to brush it very hard, I'd be pulling most of the fibers out. So now it's freed up a little bit, give it another couple good spins, and now I'm gonna brush it out again a little harder. You can get after it a little more, and then I'm gonna give it another one or two good spins so it's really nice and tight. And now you can brush on it pretty good. Okay, now we're going to use the rotary function on the vise and wrap that in close up on that orange dubbing. And your first cut in nice, and then wrap it forward. Keep pulling those fibers back as you go. Wrap it forward towards the bead. This is kind of a clumpy dubbing loop, but it's going to end up looking great. Sweet. And tie that off. 3 nice tight ones, and trim off the excess loop. Now the fly is basically done. We just need to tidy this thing up. So I'm gonna pull all those fibers back and wrap back on them a little bit. And now there's already enough bulk up front that the bead should be just about locked in. And you can see those fibers are kind of bending in weird angles, and actually some of these are a little long, so I'm just gonna grab them and just rip a few of them out. Okay, tighten that up. Nice. And the thing is, when they're curved weird like that, they look weird on the vise. but the current is just gonna straighten them all out and make them look good. So now that bead is on there well enough to not wrap forward or not slide back, gonna put in our whip finishes. I like to do 2 4-turn finishes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bam. Another one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sweet, that's nice and tight. Snip that off. And I seem to have left it in a different room, so we're not going to do it. But you'd hit this with a little bit of solar res, hit it with the UV light, that'll up the durability. Maybe put some solar res on the bead to maintain that paint a little better. Hit that with the UV light, and then that is a finished fly. And I think that looks awesome. That's going to fish super well. That's maybe a bit much fox. It could have less than that, and then the orange would come through more. But in the water, it's going to come through well. And this fly is the fly that I've caught my only winter steelhead so far this season on. So I can attest to how well it works. And it's going to be nice and round in the water, about like that, with that prop in there. Oh, about like that. Okay, done. So do me a favor, like and subscribe. I put out a new video every Monday and usually Thursdays as well. I'd really appreciate the subscribe, and I will catch y'all in the next one.